Hey, this is Crane, and this is a little bit different type video. I'm doing a replay review in video format. This is MrWizard versus T-Toss. It's a PvP on Polaris. It's a CPL match. Here, MrWizard goes for a 1-gate tech type build, and our opponent goes for a 10-12-21. The first thing I want to note is we want to understand how many zealots are coming our way. If there's 3 zealots, we want to make no shield battery, but if there's any more coming, we need to make a shield battery in order to survive. So the way we determine the zealot count is we want to see a gas and probe production before the second and third zealot pop. So if we see a late gas or a gas with no probe production, then we should expect 5 or more zealots. But in this case, we do see a gas on time and then resuming probes at the appropriate time. So we don't need this shield battery. It doesn't seem like a big deal, but it is 100 minerals, and our goal against a 3 zealot type play like this is to minimize our impact to our build. So we don't want to build a shield battery, we don't want to get crazy on removing probes from gas or anything else. We just want to do our build. So here I like that the Dragoon comes out and meets the Zealots. That's a very important part of the defense. But our Dragoon goes in the wrong direction. We don't want the Dragoon to go this way. We want it to take pot shots and back up into the choke here. And that's really important because we want to fight in the choke. That does 2 things. It lets us have more time for this Dragoon to pop, and it also makes our Zealot able to actually fight. If we don't block this choke, the Zealots can just run in straight for our probes, and if they do that, our Zealot can't do anything. It's the same speed, it'll never catch up to these Zealots. But if we force the issue by blocking the choke, then this Zealot gets to do a lot more damage while these Zealots are stuck on the ramp. So I'd like to see this Dragoon go right here and hold position. The next thing I want to point out is what is our advantage here. So in this situation, we should not be ahead in probes. If our opponent is making probes appropriately, they should actually be slightly ahead of us in probe count. And if they did get Zealots in and were able to kill 1 or 2 probes, then they'd even be a little bit more ahead. They're also ahead in army because they have 2 gates versus 1. So our only advantage is tech, so we need to abuse that. So we want to add our robo right now at 4 minutes because we have the 200-200, but in this game we don't add it until about 4:50. So that's 50 whole seconds that we could have had this robo building units, and it's just not. So that's a big deal. We need to focus on getting this robo down at the appropriate time. The next thing to note is this Nexus that's about to come up is a little bit dangerous. It's pretty standard for a 10-12 to make 6 Dragoons with range and go for an attack. And in that situation, we would have 5 Dragoons versus 6 Dragoons, both with range, and we should obviously lose that fight. We do have a shield battery, which changes the math a little bit, but it's still a little bit uncomfortable taking this Nexus at this time. You need good micro, maybe even probe pulls, and ideally we would have this robo much faster to get a Reaver out and be safer. There is an attack coming. It's a bit later than the 6 Dragoon timing, so but it is on the way. The defense was quite good. We did everything we needed to do with good micro on the Reaver and the nice arc that we have here, so that was well managed. But I'd like to point out our probe production was quite poor from here until mid-game. We want to be constantly producing probes here, and we have a bunch of gaps and then even a big supply block right here. So we should be considerably ahead in probe count because we had a much faster Nexus than our opponent, but we're actually behind. And in fact, I think at this point we should be closer to 40 if not 45 probes given the game state. So this is a big discrepancy. Obviously our opponent also was not perfect on probes, but if we were, we'd be massively ahead here, and we're not. The Robotech is here. We have Reavers and a shuttle, but we don't do anything with it. Our opponent did not go for Reaver tech, so this gives us a window where we can make something happen, especially if this was appropriately timed. We could just send with the first 2 Reavers and our goons, and maybe be able to bust, because our opponent is reliant strictly on Dragoons. If you don't want to go for a timing, you should at the very least go for drops, because again, our opponent can't drop. They don't have anything to drop. So we might as well drop since we have the ability to. We could get a little bit ahead in eco, which is nice, but just as important, it keeps our opponent pinned back. They can't attack because they have to keep Dragoons all around their base to defend up until they have cannons in place. So that buys us a lot of time to be safe, so to say. The next thing of note is a little bit later here. We don't have very good vision here. In mid-game PvP, the majority of the time games are decided by one big engagement, right? Once you hit 3 base plus, it's usually one big engagement, one player wins, the other player just folds. So having good vision lets us have the highest chance of having our army in the appropriate position. So I'd like to see observers in both of the main push paths so that we can prepare appropriately for a push. Here you can see that we're going to have one control group of units out here and spot the entire opponent's army pushing, which is good that we spot it, but it's not good because it's one control group of units versus an entire army. So we could very easily lose a few units here that we don't want to lose. So having our army pre-positioned because we saw with observers would be a big deal here. In the actual fight, we bring up our whole army and we make a really nice arc, which I like, but we have 2 things going against us. Number 1, we're down considerably in supply, especially if we consider that we're ahead 6 probes, so we're significantly behind in supply. The fact that our opponent is attacking means that that supply lead is mitigated somewhat, so maybe we should be able to win this fight. But I think the bigger issue is we have 7 High Templar. Our opponent went for 2 High Templar and 2 Archons, which I think is much, much stronger. You really can't storm out of 7 High Templar. It's much more efficient to have the 2 Archons. So what I'd like to see is when you go into mid-game like this, just make 2 High Templar for storms, and then everything after that be Archons, until we're very nearly maxed. And then you add on 2 more High Templar to have a total of 4 with a maxed army. In reality, you should have had like 1 good storm here, 1 good storm here, and then repeat in these 2 positions. And then that plus 2 Archons, you should have been able to hold this. But instead we lose by a considerable margin here because of those Archons, I would say. So I think that's a good overview of the rep, and I hope everything makes sense.